Hello and welcome to another lap guide for the Camel GT series here in iRacing. For week 8 we're at Watkins, Glen in the classic boot layout. So first the lap without commentary. Alright, so lap time here is a 1:30.2. A couple new things for the lap guides here. I have a gear indicator that's going to, I think, help quite a bit with seeing shift points and what gear the car is in. I'm going to go ahead and continue to show the iRacing interface as well, because that allows me to use the mouse cursor and maybe show a couple of other things that are helpful in the interface, including things like the splits, if you want to take a look at those. The weather for this week is afternoon, and so we'll see track temperatures anywhere from around 80 Fahrenheit to 110 Fahrenheit, roughly that range. This is a 97 Fahrenheit track temp for this particular lap, and I'll probably create a couple of different sets of setups again. I've started to do that more recently, where I've altered the setup a little bit when the track temp's on the higher end of that scale, and just kind of depends on how the car feels. I'm running 7 wing in both qualifying and race setups, and I think that you could probably get away with 6 wing when it's on the cooler end. I haven't tested that to a great degree. I know that last season we had the same weather and I ran 7 wing in all instances there. But I've learned a bit about the car since that point in time, and I feel like I've made the setup a little better since then. I think that we were running right around 131s in qualifying, although before I even started on my setup for this week, the optimal was around a low 129, which I know was on the cooler end of that scale as far as weather goes. So in any case, let's go ahead and go through the lap turn by turn here. So let's go up to turn 1. The braking point in turn 1 is really maybe to start at about the 200. Excuse me. But from the perspective of threshold braking, I try to reach threshold braking a little after that, probably closer to the darker shade of asphalt here, so really right in between the 2 and the 1. It's a pretty late braking. You're actually going to see about 70 to 80% braking done here typically, and you'll see where the car is at that point in time. It's maybe just past that darker shade of asphalt. So you can brake pretty late. You do need to brake pretty hard, and then as you get into the corner, get off the brakes pretty quickly to help get the car rotated in, and if anything, just a tad bit of trail braking here to help rotate the car. As far as the curb goes here on the right, you can use about half of the curbing that you see here. You don't necessarily need to. You can see I touch it just a bit, but any more than this little center section here, it really unsettles the car quite a bit. So you don't want to get up on that too far. But you definitely want to get the car as close to the curbing here as you can to, again, get on throttle as soon as you can. So you'll see me started to get on throttle just as I come off that curbing. Be careful getting back to full throttle too soon. Rolling on that pretty gradually, and there's the full throttle point here. Of course, you can come all the way over to the left here. The further you come over, the more difficult it is to get back to the to the main racing surface prior to this grass. You can clip this corner of the grass just a little bit, but any more than a little bit is going to be an off track. So be careful, obviously, doing so. So let's go ahead and just play that through here at speed. So all the way up through the S's, turns 2, 3, and 4, just wide open throttle. Try to straighten out the road as best you can to carry as much speed up here as you can. And as we come down the back straight into the carousel, really just wanting to use as much of this of the road as you can. So one of the keys here at Watkins Glen is to use all of the racing surface in many of the corners here and make sure that you're carrying the optimal amount of speed around the corners there. I actually ran just a little wide here in this corner, but I'll show you kind of where my targets are as far as the points of turn in and apex. Again, the change in asphalt is a good point for turn in. It is also a very quick light braking that's done here. So you'll see actually maybe just a quick 20% or so braking done there where the car is at. You can see I'm actually coming over to the left just a little, trying to use all of the racing surface there, getting the turn in done right about that point. And what I'm aiming to do is reach the curbing to the right. You can get the wheels up on there, but you don't need to. Really just getting as close to the line, the yellow line here, as possible. I end up running just a little wider than I like to. Throttle point I think was good, but you'll see that on exit, I really run right up to the limit on exit here. So getting on throttle right at about this point of the corner, and full throttle happened pretty quickly actually. Let's go back to that. A little bit of a thunderfoot there. Well, there's full throttle already. The mistake at this point might have been that I got on throttle just maybe a little too soon, full throttle a little too soon, but I was okay here on exit. You'll see that I come pretty close to an off track. So normally you'll want to, I mean, you can use a little bit of this curve in here, but normally you'll want to not run quite as wide as a line there. So let's play that one through. Okay, so coming down into the chute, turn 6. Again, using all of the road here. The change in asphalt is another good reference point. You'll see threshold braking happening maybe just a little bit before that. About 60 or so percent braking. Downshift into third. Now again, trying to get the car over to the left here. Treat it as a late apex though. Yeah, if you apex too soon, you're going to have a bit of difficulty getting back on throttle at the right amount of time and not running wide here on exit. And so I'm starting to get on throttle right at about this point, gradually. And now finally reaching full throttle, and actually ran once again wide on this corner. The reason I chose to use this lap for the guide is that it does help to show some of the limits on the track surface. And you can come all the way up into the gravel here without an off track. Now, this is kind of rare for me to come all the way off the racing surface this much. But I didn't want to lift. I wanted to carry full throttle here, but definitely not the preferred line. Preferably, the car is another couple feet to the left at this point, but you can get away with that without an off track. So I thought that was kind of interesting to show. And it was a quick sector, although again, that's pretty dangerous to be running off at this point. I think you could very easily lose control of the car trying to run that line there. So try not to run that wide, obviously. So let's play this one through here. Just a quick note, there was a bit of trail braking going on. Very helpful to just tap the brakes lightly here to help get the car rotated if you're carrying just a little bit too much speed. So be prepared to use brake and throttle inputs lightly to kind of help get the car where you need it to be and back on throttle again as soon as you can. All right, so coming up on the toe, turn 7. The threshold brake point is really between the 1 and the 200. It's about 70% right at this point. You can see where the car is at. And again, trying to use all of the race surface here to give me a nice wide entry into this corner. So if we kind of come back here, braking is going to start at about the 200 and then threshold before the 100. And then we'll go ahead and start turning in. The turn-in point for me, I actually look to see where the line, kind of starts to widen. The road starts to widen a little bit. At the point just past that is where I'm kind of thinking of turning in. And I don't like to run too wide on this corner. There are a few different lines that you can take. Some of the lines may be affected by the setup, the way the car feels, maybe even weather. Running too tight in the warmer weather may result in a slide. So you may run a little wider in the warmer weather just to be a little bit safer here. But the line that I like to run is kind of just to the inside of this different patch of asphalt here. You can see a little bit of trail braking still going on here. You do want to get on throttle by about the midpoint or just past the midpoint, and very, very gradually getting back to throttle, as getting back to throttle too soon will spin the car here. But if you're not to the curbing or to this line by mid-corner, you're going to delay throttle, and you're also going to delay getting back to full throttle, and it'll cost you quite a bit of speed. You're coming up a hill here, and this is actually a pretty fast zone on the track. You can nearly get into 5th gear with this setup, and so you definitely want to keep your speed up through this corner. So I guess speed is getting close to about, 78 miles per hour at the midpoint of that. Just being trying to be patient here with throttle. So as I start to get back on throttle, about 50-60%, but it's going to take a bit of time here, getting back to full throttle. One of the things to always bear in mind as you're getting on throttle is how much how much steering input is still going on. There's quite a bit at this point. So the mistake that often happens here is obviously getting back to full throttle, and this is an area where you'll see a lot of spins happen. So still not quite full throttle, still turning the car a bit. You can use all of the road right up to the grass here, where it kind of extends out a little bit further. And there's the full throttle point right here. So 2nd gear all the way through this corner is what I'm using. And then you'll see the shift up into 3rd happening right there. So let's watch this corner again at speed. Right, so as I mentioned, you can very nearly get it right up into 5th gear. If you've carried the right amount of speed, you're actually going to be pretty close to the rev limiter in 4th gear. So I don't shift into 5th, but you'll know if you've gotten around turn number 7 well if you're right about that point. So the amount of speed that the car is about 160-ish miles per hour where you hit the braking zone, which is starting at the, well, maybe just before the 200. Let's see how that looks from cockpit vision. It's very easy to brake late, very common to brake late here, and it can definitely get you into a lot of trouble. I try to get to threshold braking just before this lighter shade of asphalt. So between the 1 and the 200, maybe closer to the 200 actually. And there's going to be a brief lockup here. So I think I went to about 80% braking. You'll hear the tires lock just a bit. So let's see how that sounds. So you can hear that. So I brake maybe just a little too hard. So 70% braking is a pretty good target here for your threshold. And you'll see that happening right at about that lighter patch of asphalt there. So very hard braking. And as I mentioned, the issue with this corner is if you brake too late, it can get you into a lot of trouble on corner exit. You can run wide, you can slide. It's difficult to get back to throttle as soon as you'd like. And getting back to throttle on this corner may even be more likely to result in a slide than the prior corner. And so you're actually going to see the car get a little bit loose here on the corner exit. So I'll show you what that looks like. Another reason I like showing this lap because it demonstrates the limit there in traction that happens. So still braking very hard. It's maybe getting back to braking, and just a quick note on braking is that it's a very hard braking zone, 160 mile per hour at that point, and you're carrying quite a bit of braking, and to me it's deceptively, the amount of braking is more than you would normally feel like is needed. At least from my experience, it felt like it just needed more than I originally thought. And maybe that's just a combination of how much speed is here and also the amount of vision you have as you kind of come up over the hill. So as you come up over this hill, you really can't see the braking zone yet. And if you've got a car right up in front of you here, obviously that makes it even more difficult to spot. The boards are a little bit concealed behind the railing, and so that again kind of obscures your brake markers a little bit. And even this kind of lighter patch of asphalt isn't visible until you're pretty dang close to it. And so maybe because of that, I found myself braking late a lot and then making a mistake of just braking late, and of course costing a lot of speed on corner exit. And so again, just spotting this 200 board first should be the first marker that you're kind of keeping an eye on. Thinking of reaching threshold brake right about that point would be a good idea, and it really is just before this patch of lighter patch of asphalt. So that's a good marker to definitely keep an eye on. Keep the car wide. Be patient on turn-in. You need all of the surface. All of the racing surface is needed to carry the right amount of speed here. And so you'll see that I'm trying to keep the car real tight here to the left. Had a little bit of space, a little bit more space that I could have used. And now beginning to turn in just before reaching the end of this white line here. And you'll know how soon you can get back on throttle based on how quickly, or not quickly, how close you can get to this curbing here. You don't want to touch it. It's a pretty steep curbing that will definitely unsettle the car too much. So don't touch that. Get as close to that as you can though. And getting back on throttle just as you kind of start to pull away from that curbing there. And again, being very, very patient back to full throttle at this point. You can see the car's following this patch of asphalt here pretty closely now. And that's actually where I got just a little loose right here. 50 to 60% throttle with about a 9-degree steering angle there, and it was just a little too much. So let's listen to how this sounds on corner exit specifically. Actually, that was the point that I wanted to show right there. So getting back to full throttle right there was probably just a little too early with the amount of speed that I was carrying. And you'll see the car starts to slide and there's a quick correction. So that's where you're going to have a little bit of trouble with the car sliding out on you, especially as the temperatures get hotter than this. Track surface is a little bit more slick, and later in the race when there's more tire wear, even more so. So let's watch this corner through now at speed. Back that up a bit, sorry. Okay, so coming into turn 9, once again, using all of the surface, I think you need all of the racing surface to get around this corner well. And you can really send the car into a little bit of a four-wheel drift here, just by carrying just a little bit too much speed. I could have taken the corner just a little bit more quickly here. I think it was a tenth or so less than my optimal for this session. So it's better to obviously be a little bit more cautious to make sure that you can get a good exit than it is to try to ride right up on the edge of traction. When you push the edge of traction here, just beyond the limit is very, very unforgiving, and as you go beyond the limit of traction, you're going to feel the entire car start to slide wide on you, and of course that's going to cost you even more speed, quite a bit more speed, and delay getting back up to throttle. So as far as markers go, the lighter shade of asphalt here is where I start to brake, and you'll see threshold braking is about 60%, just past that. So maybe let's see if there's a good reference point for that I can spot. I definitely use this as my marker to start braking. I also, at this point, am thinking of keeping the car to the right and not turning in too soon until braking is done. So carrying a pretty good amount of braking through here. It is actually a pretty hard braking zone. Again, because you've got to slow the car so much to get around this corner at the right speed. So starting braking at this point, reaching about 60%, holding that for a bit, now turning in. Now this line in the asphalt, I'd say you want to cross that before you reach the apex of the hill here, or the crest of the hill. Although I'm not visually looking there, I think it's a good point to go back and look at the replays to see where you're getting the car. And if you're having trouble with this corner, go back and look at your line through the corner. And another kind of useful tip is that sometimes you'll accidentally take a corner faster than you ever have, and you won't be quite sure why. And as you go back and look at your replays, and if you're looking at your session or your sector times, and you're looking at a corner that you took unusually well, go back and analyze that. Go back and look at what you did a little bit differently, and you may spot something in your technique or something in your timing with your brake, your throttle, that you did uncharacteristically different than other laps, and you might actually learn something about the car, learn something that you can do that help you carry a little bit more speed than you typically do. So sometimes that happens just a little bit by accident, and use that as a opportunity to go back and look at that lap, look at that sector, and see what you did differently, and you may be able to find some speed that way. So what I like to do sometimes is if I'm having trouble with a corner like this corner, I'll go back and look at replays and laps where I was comfortable and quick through there, and pay attention to each of those points: corner entry, braking, corner entry, the turn in points, where the car is at midpoint through the corner, and where I am getting back to throttle, and kind of reprogram that into, my memory to try to remember where I was and get back on track, because you can start to get into some bad lines or bad habits, and you got to get back to what it was that you were doing well and try to practice and get a rhythm for that. So in this case, the points that I'm looking at is turning in And turning in feels a little bit late. Braking is still going on. So as braking starts to let off, I'm now thinking about this late apex, but not reaching this curbing too soon. There's a point here in the curbing that you definitely don't want to touch, and you can see how the angle of the curbing starts to come back in, which is the angle you want to follow. So the car needs to follow this curbing on corner exit pretty closely in order to get back on throttle at that point. So getting back through that, just as you come around the elbow or the steeper point of curbing, you want to be starting to get back to throttle pretty soon. So gradually getting back on throttle at this point. And again, patient on throttle here. This is another point where getting back to full throttle soon will spin the car. And now getting back to full throttle at that point. So let's take a look at this at speed. Okay, so turn 11, just a throttle lift here. And actually you don't need to come off fully off throttle, but also again using all of the racing surface, getting the car even up a little bit over the white line here to do so, and turning in before the 100. So maybe between the 2 and the 100 is when you start to turn in a bit, and then all you're doing is just lifting on throttle just a bit, turning and getting back to full throttle just past this apex. And again, there's a bit of a corner or elbow in the curbing there, so you don't want to hit that too early. You don't want to unsettle the car too much. So my reference point to getting back to throttle is just past this, and then carrying full throttle all the way through the corner. So let's watch that. Okay, so the final turn, turn 11. I keep the car in 4th gear now. I actually used to downshift into 3rd, and you still can, and I think you would still with fuel and potentially with hotter weather. But you can carry enough speed through this corner that you don't need to downshift into 3rd. So in this case, the car is going to stay in 4th. Braking will happen right about the end of the tire barrier here. And it's about a 20-30% braking, I think. Maybe actually closer to 40%. And another corner where I didn't quite hit this optimally, the exit ran a little bit wide, and I actually it delayed on how soon I was able to get on throttle, but it was fairly minor as far as the time lost. The difference, or maybe the different technique that I would have preferred to use here would have been to get turned in just a little closer and on throttle a little sooner than this. So what you can see happen here is I actually don't think I braked quite enough. So let's go through that. So hitting braking point right here, 40%, 50% is probably a little better there. And as you start to turn in, there might be just a bit of tapping the brakes to help rotate the car to get to, again, where you can see an angle in the curbing. Just as you get past this is where you want to really start rolling back on throttle. So I would like to be on throttle at this point, but because I felt the car running a little wide, didn't quite slow the car enough, delaying my throttle all the way till here. And because of that delay in throttle, I was being careful to get back to throttle, but until I felt like I could get to full throttle, and I really just kind of thunder-footed it out the rest of the corner here. So just a little bit late there. Typically, what I would like to be doing is getting on throttle, rolling on throttle right about this point, and being just a little closer so that I have a little bit more room to do that, and I could have gained a little bit more time from that. So getting back on throttle, and one of the other reasons I am using this lap is that this does show, again, kind of limits on the racing surface. This is just before and off track, and putting the left side of the car up on the grass there can be done. but that's not real typical, and it's not necessarily faster. So let's take a look at the final corner now at speed. All right, so that's a lap of Watkins Glen. Hope you found it helpful. Talk to you later.